Hello and welcome to the Why of Teaching. My name is Joanne Wright, Pinellas County's 2013 Teacher of the Year and the proud host of the Why of Teaching. We're going to be hitting some hot topics with our teachers and offering solutions from teachers in the field. You'll also see some teaching strategies and processes happening as we strive for 100% student success in Pinellas County. If you're not an educator, this is an amazing opportunity to see what's on teachers' minds and what's happening in our classrooms. So sit back and enjoy the show, The Why of Teaching. Welcome back. Tonight, our roundtable discussion focuses on Socratic Seminar. We will hear from an elementary, middle, and high school teacher that uses Socratic Seminar to engage their students in accountable talk in their classrooms. We will witness their students in action and hear from these teachers how to implement the student-led structure in classrooms and what they feel the benefits are. So let's go out to our roundtable and get the discussion going on Socratic Seminars. Hi, and welcome back to the Why of Teaching. Socratic Seminar is going to be the hot topic for today. Socratic Seminar is just an amazing protocol for our students to learn how to interact and take part in collaborative discussion that's going to help them to deepen and practice their new knowledge. We're very fortunate today to be joined by teachers from across 3 grade levels and 3 subject areas. So to my right, we have Ms. Deanna Barthel.
Hello, I'm Deanna Barthel. I teach 9th grade English and 12th grade reading.
And over here we have Nicole.
Hello, I'm Nicole Kengad. I'm a 4th grade elementary school teacher.
And to my left we have Vanessa Coe.
Hi, I'm Vanessa Coe. I'm from Palm Harbor Middle School, and I'm a math and avid teacher.
And we're also joined by one of our avid coaches today, Ms. Carolee Prince.
Hi, I'm Carolee Prince, and I'm the District Director of Avid Elementary.
So to kick off the show, I'm going to ask the group what you are so passionate about Socratic Seminar before we dive into the details of what it looks like. So what about this strategy just inspires you to use it, and what are the big takeaways for our students? Vanessa, would you like to begin?
Sure. One of the things that I love about this strategy in particular is the opportunity for students to engage in productive struggle. We work very hard throughout the year to make math a safe environment for them, because a lot of times students tend to shy away from speaking if they feel like they're going to be incorrect, because they know in math a lot of times there is one correct answer. And so in this discipline, I strive to make sure every student feels comfortable and safe. And so Socratic Seminar sets up an opportunity for them to wrestle with content in a safe environment. And I also love the idea that the students get to participate in creating the question. That's one of the things I do in the beginning, is allow them to be the ones that produce the problem, so they feel like it's worth solving.
I think that it's a really safe way to make sure that all of the students are being involved. It's a nice way to assess, and for me to be able to monitor and understand what their understanding of it is, both if we've tried it at the beginning or at the end of a lesson. So it's just a really nice way to make sure that everybody is involved, and it's a safe way to really talk out their thinking.
I absolutely agree with that. The involvement is so key. For my content, I really value the fact that it forces students to rely on their textual evidence and support their opinions and support the things that they have to say with information from the text that we're reading, so that way it makes sure that they are owning that content.
It's really all about student ownership and high student engagement and rigor. So really getting the students to move their thinking from what's on the paper and what's on the text to being able to analyze it for themselves and then to be able to speak about it. So it's really moving all the way down to the deepest level of knowledge.
And we were fortunate enough to actually come in and film your classrooms. So could you share with our viewers, what is it that we're going to see in your videos today?
My students discussed the topic of sexism in dress codes, and that was something that's been hotly discussed and hotly debated around, and they're very interested in that, and especially very passionate at the high school level of maintaining their autonomy. And so I brought that into the classroom. They read several resources, formulated several questions with their evidence, and brought those to discussion. So you'll see my kids talking about that topic.
Really needed.
Can I say something? Well, it kind of does help you because, like, when you go to a job interview, they're going to tell you what to wear. It's like coming to school. They tell you what to wear. So when you, in the outside world, when you are ready to, like, go to a job, they're going to be like, okay, you can't wear this. It has to be all, like, when I was working as a photographer, they told me you have to wear all black. I couldn't wear colors. I had to wear all black because that was the rule. It's like when you come to school, that's the rule.
For my students, what you're going to see is an 8th grade standard on functions. And so the students have spent some time with linear functions at this point, but they've not looked at or explored anything other than linear functions. So they're going to dive into what it looks like to consider qualitative graphs. And this was really interesting for them because bringing in their background knowledge, like Deanna mentioned, they had to go back to the text. They had to go back to the graphs. And I encourage them to speak in that way. And so they were able to drive the conversation with academic language and engage in a discussion that I feel like prior to that they might have felt a little more hesitant to dive into.
So ladies and gentlemen, remember that you start the conversation in the middle, you're listening to one another, talking to one another, and don't interrupt. It's gonna be awesome. Let's find out which one it really is, okay?
Can we start with like any figure?
Either one, yeah, ready, set, go.
Alright. So figure 3. What do you think would happen if A was a map for the train station?
I think that since it kind of like goes and then it kind of turns, I think that it's kind of like turning into the station and then it stops kind of in the middle, well, like 2/3 of the way to this side. I think that it's kind of stopping to let the passengers off.
And I know just from viewing your video, Vanessa, there's a lot of interaction at points between the two circles. Can you speak to that?
Sure. So I have an inner circle and an outer circle setup. We call it pilot co-pilot setup. And so I will have somewhere between 6 and 8 students in the center circle, and they're the ones that are going to engage in the conversation verbally. However, the outer circle is just as involved because their engagement is in writing. So they will write on a Post-it note, they may not speak, and they will hand it off to their pilot. This gives safety, again, for the students to speak. So if it is the pilot that is hesitant to speak, now they've got a voice from behind them that they can even say, we think, or my co-pilot thinks if they're uncertain. Likewise, the person behind, if they're more hesitant to speak, they now have an opportunity to show their thinking and their rationale and pass that along into the conversation.
And Nicole, how about you?
In our science curriculum, it begins with some type of a probing question, just to get the kids starting to thinking about what the topic is going to be about. We are working on patterns in the night sky, stars, constellations, and how they change depending on what the season is. So once they've worked through the entire workshop, at the end of the workshop, right before we do our final assessment, we revisit that probe. So the students can see how they've revised their knowledge, how their thinking has changed in a more deeper way. And before taking that final assessment, they can talk it out with their peers and to really make sure, and for me to make sure that they really understand what the content is asking.
I agree with the people that said C because Earth spins on orbits because when Earth spins, that's kind of like rotating, and when it's orbiting, that's kind of like a.
And Deanna, I know in your lesson, the students actually switched. Can you just speak a little bit around that?
Sure. So mine, we affectionately call it fishbowl to start with. So if you hear the kids referring to it as that's why. So the inner circle, we refer to them as the fish. They're the people having the conversation. The conversation only revolves around them. No one in the exterior circle or myself has any role or talks at all during the conversation. And the way this works is the inner circle has a conversation, while the exterior circle, their role as as the observers are to also be taking reflective notes and using the rubrics to evaluate not only their peers, but the discussion that they're having. So that outer circle is identifying if the students are using their text evidence, identifying if they're using higher level thinking questions, in addition to monitoring for behavior. Are the students in this inner circle making eye contact? Are they all contributing? Are the things that they're saying academically rigorous and relevant to the discussion? So there's a function for every person in the room, and then eventually the two groups switch, and so the observers then become the fish and vice versa.
And Deanna, you had mentioned the generating of questions. Could you speak around that? We noticed in the videos that the students were, as a pre-step to doing Socratic, they were busy generating questions. What is that around? How do you set your kids up for that?
Well, I think it's important for them to come to the fishbowl prepared with something to say, because it builds their confidence, and then it makes it more likely that all students are going to contribute during discussion. So in AVID, we focus on COSTAs as the higher level thinking, and so I have my students create COSTAs questions, different levels, and they have to identify the level of questioning, and then they have to go back and answer the question with text evidence. And they come to the discussion with those questions, so that way they have something in hand that they can immediately ask. And if no one is able to respond to that question, well, they can share their answer and then have a discussion based on that. So they have those questions prepared. In addition, my students have with them in the discussion an academic language script to make sure that they're using that academic language, making sure that the conversation stays rigorous and it doesn't devolve into just an opinion-based discussion.
And Kiralee, as an AVID coach, could you speak to what scaffolded steps are perhaps needed to generate the questions, or how you've seen it done in classes across the district?
Yeah, so the first thing to do is exactly as Deanna was saying about really making sure your students have a strong understanding of the levels of questions. So regardless of the type of questioning you're using, if it's Web's depth of knowledge or if it's COSTAs, you have to get the students to go to those level 2, level 3 questions, really open-ended, multiple answers based on the evidence that they can pull and provide, and so that way the conversation can be really deep and really rich. So that's the first step, is making sure that they understand the level question. Then the second step is making sure they understand how to develop a question. So what really constitutes a question that could create some deep discussion and using that academic language and really based on the text. So once you get your students where they're comfortable with questioning, then you can kind of turn them loose into the Socratic Seminar type conversation, because you get your students where they're having their own questions, so they feel really ownership because they're leading the entire discussion. And they also are getting their peers to think about the knowledge in a new way and the content in a new way, which is really exciting.
And so Vanessa, I noticed that your students were also, do you also use COSTAs?
I do use those levels of thinking, mainly because there are 3 levels instead of 5, so the students feel a little more connection to it, because the information is a little bit more limited. And so what I have the students do is I make sure that I model those types of questions throughout the year. So it kind of keeps me accountable, because I know that's what I want my students to be asking one another. So I refer to those same prompts and those same keywords in my questioning. And then the students have little flip books that they will share in the class, and they are using those as foundations to develop their questions. So their questions could be things they could presently answer on their own based on the content, or questions they still have about the content, and they would love for someone to support them in answering it using the text.
I think it's very important to have a high structure and for all of the students to really understand what their role is, and for all of the students to be able to be flexible and familiar enough with understanding each of those roles. So it takes a lot of practice, it takes high structure and a lot of positive reinforcement, because it'll be a learning process for everybody, including me as the teacher, depending on what group of students I'm working with. So it might work a little bit differently from year to year depending on who the students are. So we call it cat and fish. So we have our little fish in the middle. So I usually try to do about 4 or 5 students, because I've noticed with many of my groups, if the group is too large, that's when we have a lot more behavior problems. So I try to keep it to about 4 or 5 students on the inside. Those are our fish. And then each of them has a cat on the outside who are watching them. And they all are very official with their clipboards, and they're taking notes, and they're listening to everybody saying. And depending on whatever the probing question is, they're using some of those higher order thinking terminology and vocabulary, and we also have sentence starters. So I have to make sure that they're listening, and they have to make sure that they're listening also. And I know that because I'll say, I agree with so-and-so because, or I heard you say this, or I disagree. We might even use some hand signals where they're doing something like this, which means, oh, I agree with you. So it helps me to monitor, to know that everyone's on the same page and that everybody's involved in really listening.
And Carrie Lee, is it necessary for the students to only limit themselves to the questions that they generated when they're taking part in the Socratic?
No, they can develop questions as they're going through. The only part that's really required in order to keep it a Socratic seminar and use that Socratic dialogue is to have it be generated and based on the text or based on the content that they're talking about. That avoids that personal attack, that avoids that personal opinion-based discussion. So it changes it from an academic dialogue to a debate if you allow that personal discussion to happen. So I would say they could totally create as many questions as they wanted to as they're going through, especially if something new pops in. I love the idea that Vanessa was stating about the co-pilot and the pilot. So the co-pilot's allowed to add to the discussion through sticky notes and hand it to the pilot, because then they're allowed to contribute to that conversation. And I know that the other teachers do something similar like that as well. And that allows for a really natural discourse to happen.
And that's what I was reflecting on as you were saying that, just a natural way for students to take part in such a collaborative discussion that's really going to bring them to a place where they can broaden their knowledge on something. So I think our viewers are I think our viewers probably have a lot of questions around how to specifically set up a Socratic seminar in their classroom, what protocols are necessary in order to run a Socratic seminar efficiently. So we look forward to discussing that topic when we come back in just a minute.